हेलो 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 हेलो। शंकर भाई, माइक खोल के बोल, तेरा माइक बंद है उधर।
आवाज़ आ रही है मेरी? हिमांशु, हेलो।
आ रही है भाई, आ रही है। ओके भाई, माइक म्यूट कर दे। हाँ।
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the third lecture of the CSIR-NISpR Distinguished Lecture Series. It is a great privilege to introduce our distinguished speaker for today's lecture, Dr. Manisha G. Singh, an accomplished applied economist with extensive expertise in economic evaluation, technology use, industry, labor, restructuring, and development. Dr. Singh's research has significantly contributed to advancing the understanding of economic impact evaluation of technologies, strengthening innovation through global alliances, examining the digital divide in production systems, and supporting international development funding for government restructuring initiatives. She has undertaken important consulting assignments with leading Indian and international institutions, including CSIR, CII, WHO, and the World Bank. Her scholarly work has been published in reputed national and international journals, contributing meaningfully to the discourse on innovation led economic transformation. In addition to her research and consulting engagements, Dr. Singh has also been actively involved in teaching economics, most recently at Delhi Technological University, TTU. Academically, she holds a PhD in economics from the University of Maryland, College Park, USA, an MBA from the Faculty of Management Studies, University of Delhi, and BA Honours in Economics from Lady Shri Ram College, University of Delhi. Today, she'll be delivering her lecture on the theme S&T Innovation Driven Sustained Growth and Economic Impact. We are truly honored to have her with us and look forward to benefiting from her rich insights and experience. It is now my proud privilege to invite Dr. Manisha G. Singh to deliver the third lecture under the CSIR-NISpR Distinguished Lecture Series. Thank you. Presentation on. This is forward. This is forward.
Okay, that's fine. So thank you very much. It's partly like homecoming. I've been visiting this hall for a good decade, and the subject is very close to my heart. But before I delve into it, thank you, Dr. Isam, and thank you all the scientists who are here and those who are watching. It's a pleasure and a privilege to be here. So I have done my work, research work, in kind of fits and starts. So things that I found challenging, some that came my way, some that I sought. My claim to fame within CSIR is the socioeconomic economic impact assessment of some CSIR technologies, of which the most talked about was the streptokinase study. So I'm going to touch on that towards the end. But today, what I want to talk about is economic growth, what drives it, how can it be sustained, and what role does science and technology and innovation play in that. And in doing so, I will be drawing a little bit on the lectures by the 2025 Economics Nobel laureates work and some who are past laureates. So to kind of string together in a simplified way where growth comes from, why are we bothering to understand, and what can we do about it? So how do we, okay. So the very first thing is, what is economic growth? How should we think about it, right? It's really increase in incomes, right? At a micro level, for me, my growth economically is about increase in incomes. When we add this income for everybody, we are looking at total income for the country, which is called sum of all factor incomes, which is GDP at factor cost, right? When we take sum of all output production, right? That is GDP at market prices. It includes taxes. So typically when we talk about GDP growth, we are looking at GDP at market prices. That's normally what we are talking about. So one, we have GDP for India. Then how do we compare it to GDP of Brazil, of US? So that's another issue. We can look at foreign exchange rate, or we can look at purchasing power parity. What it essentially means is that one, let's say US dollar, what would it fetch in US? What would it fetch in India? Right? What is the value of that? So that rate is called the triple P rate. Now, in India, there are a lot of services which are not traded. They are valued at Indian terms. So our triple P rate is usually much less than the Forex rate. So the Forex rate has been hovering around 90 rupees to a dollar, whereas the triple P rate is around 25, right? So that's the difference. But even if we can figure out all these measurement issues, right? What is the satisfaction you get out of that increase in income? So if you've been reading the reports, people are saying my income is increasing. These are newspaper reports. But I feel I'm worse off, right? Why? Rent is increasing. School fees are increasing. So my living standard is actually a bit less. I'm not growing, right? So that is another issue. So keep that at the back of your mind, because we will come back. We'll circle back to it. Okay, so this is when you think about utility, okay, the one place where economists have done it worldwide is in poverty measures. So we started with, you might recall 32 rupees a day. It became very controversial, right? So India's poverty line was 32 rupees a day per person. Okay. So it raised a major hue and cry that you can't even get a bottle of Coke. Are you making fun of the poor? Right? You may debate that, but that was a monetary measure based on the core of food calories to define what poor are. But we have stepped away from that, and we now have this multi-dimensional poverty index, okay, which will actually see the degree of deprivation, right? So it will see how much access to food, access to shelter, healthcare, education, several other factors. Okay. And this is a world standard led by the World Bank, right? So we've been able to do it for poverty, not so for GDP, right? So far, when we talk about economic growth, we really should be taking into account these things, but we are stuck right now with GDP because it is measurable. So just for context, India's GDP is about 350 lakh crores or 350 trillion, about USD 4 trillion. World GDP is going to be almost 120 trillion. How many zeros in a trillion? Right? So when you start writing it in one line, it becomes mind-boggling, right? But that is the kind of growth we have seen. How did it come about? This is a graph lifted from the source, okay? I'm sorry about the quality, but hopefully you can see. The important thing is to notice the strong hockey stick effect, right? Almost flat till the year 1800. Then there is a turnaround, and then there seems like there's no stopping. What is going on? Okay, this is world GDP, global GDP. What about the country breakup, if you like? This is a famous graph, mathematically, economically not correct, but has a huge impact. Okay, 1 AD. Which country has the maximum share of global GDP? India, 40%. More than China, more than any other country. Okay, so India and China together contributed majority of the world's GDP. So then what happened? Around 1820, right? Around that time, Europe and USA started growing much faster. So their share of world GDP started increasing, right? So 1800, 1820. What happened there? Industrial revolution. So as long as it was agrarian, as long as it was artisanal, crafts based, China and India did very well, right? Then the industrial revolution happened, right? So year 1800 onwards is when it started and the sustained growth started, and the reason is industrial revolution. Okay, we've had changes. 1950 onwards, Japan started growing a lot. China 1980, India 1990, but it is still the case that Western Europe and USA are still the bulk of the global GDP, about 30 trillion each. Okay. What's special? Why did industrial revolution begin in Britain? How come it spread to Western Europe? Okay. Why did it not spread to India and China at that time? Okay. So Nobel laureate Joel Mokyer's study, he's an economic historian. He has studied, I didn't do that. Okay. Okay, next one. Okay. So he has studied this, and this is the centerpiece of the talk, which I'm putting up front. Okay. What happened was a culture of science, open science in 17th and 18th centuries were the bedrock for the industrial revolution to happen and to start in 18th century in Britain. A culture of science and open science. Now you might wonder, okay, keep that in the back of your head. Why did Britain lose its preeminent position? Okay, just have that thought while we go through this. Okay. So growth can be in two ways. One, I have another factory, I have more capital, more land, and therefore I get the output. It's kind of linear. We call it constant returns to scale, right? Or it could be innovation led, where we do more with less. So productivity rises, right? And therefore we have what we call increasing returns in that, right? So roughly I've put industrial revolution 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. One is characterized by steam engine, industrial scale by James Watt. Plus, there are a whole host of things, but there are also cannons that help them rule the world for quite a while. Cannons and other weapons. Industrial Revolution 2 built on the first one, railroads, huge effect, transport and mobility. We also had communications through telegraph and similar other technologies. A whole host of which one, cotton weaving. In different products, there was technological improvement, and therefore we had in the 19th century Industrial Revolution 2. The third one characterized by aircraft, rockets, bombs, missiles, computers, IT, internet, right? The fourth one, I'm missing here smartphones, okay? When computing became handheld is when there has been a revolution, right? So Internet of Things, robotics, drones, satellites, AI. It is unfolding. We are all a part of it. So Nobel laureates, again, 2025, 4 Nobel laureates, Aghion and Howitt, they modeled innovation-led growth, right? So what they describe it is an ongoing process of creative destruction. So new technologies come in, they get adopted. The ones that work, they expand. As they expand, the ones they have replaced start to shrink and collapse. Okay. So a very painful example is TCS laying off 12,000 workers. Okay. Tata's job is called another government job. They actually have a Tata pension, right? Like the government has. No other industry house has it. So you get employed by Tatas, it's for life. And yet, TCS laid off 12,000 people. Not because they wanted to, they had to, right? So their business model is under challenge by AI and agentic AI, right? So we're seeing it unfold. So AI has been talked about for several years. Now it is coming to a level, to a scale where it is useful for people beyond the coding industry, right? And therefore it is threatening those which were supporting it. So they have to reform, they have to transform, or they risk shrinking even more, right? And this has been happening throughout since 1800s, right? So we are going to look at that and see what is it that we can gather out of this for ourselves. So there are skeptics. You might have heard of Malthusian trap, which was basically for an agrarian economy. Population was growing faster than agricultural productivity. And if that is the state that had continued, then basically there would be famines, disease, wars, and breakdown of capital. We would go back to subsistence level. That didn't happen. As we've seen in the graph, we actually took off, right? Similarly, Schumpeterian predictions. Now, Schumpeter was the original economist who brought in the process of creative destruction. But towards the end, he said that innovation can become routine, it can be bogged down by bureaucracy, and growth can decline. So again, a skeptic. Why has it not happened, right? So we'll see that. The reason we want to see what are the drivers of economic growth is so that we can harness them through policy and somehow ensure that economic growth can be sustained, right? So that's what this is about. So now, a few growth models spanning half a century Most of them are Nobel laureates, starting with Solow. But just to see how difficult it is to even model it, right? And to explain what are the drivers that have emerged out of it. So, Professor Solow at MIT wrote this celebrated seminal paper where he found that after all factor use is accounted for, so we have output, we see how much labor we've used, what have we given to labor, similarly, how much rent we are paying for the land, right? When all of these factors are accounted for, there is still something left. How come? Right? He called it the residue, which it was, he called it TFP, total factor productivity. It's a productivity factor that arises from using all other factors together. It cannot be assigned to any particular factor, whether it is labor or capital. It's because all of them are being used together. And he called it, what is driving it? Technical change, right? Now, that was amazing at that time. But the problem is, this technical change is exogenous to the model, exogenous to the modeled economy. So if it is coming from somewhere else, how do we harness it? We can't. How do we even forget harness? How do we explain it? So then we had so-called endogenous growth models, which are trying to explain how we are getting this residual. How are we getting this productivity factor? And it is something called externalities. Now, to understand what is an externality, right? So think about it this way. In NISpR, you are doing a whole host of studies, right? But you are standalone, right? You do not take into account what other people are doing because you can't. You can only control what you do, right? But now, supposing you are in a network where other people are doing similar things as well. So you benefit because other people are doing it, even though you can't control it. Okay? Similarly, think of a factory which is on an island like Lakshadweep. Okay? It's just one factory by itself, right? It's doing its job, but when it needs a mechanic for a machine breakdown, it has to come from the mainland or outside, right? When some laborer, some worker is sick, they need a replacement, not available on the island, they're coming from outside. Now think of a factory which is located in, let's say, Gurgaon, Manesar, and there's a clutch of factories there. So the support services are also over there, right? They are external to the factory. They're not in the control of the factory owner or operator, but they are there, right? So that is a positive externality available to a factory in Gurgaon, Manesar, but it is not available to somebody, a factory which is in Lakshadweep. Similarly, going back to the NISpR example, if there are other people doing similar work, you could learn from them, right? And it will affect your own work. It will improve your own productivity. If you didn't have that, you did everything by yourself, you would spend more time doing it, right? So that's where the externalities come from. Very simply, that's the concept. And different economists, I think almost all of them are Nobel laureates, right? They modeled it differently. So Romer said these are specialized intermediate inputs. Final output is the same. You're using the same factors of production, barring intermediate inputs. So if you're using superior materials or superior machinery, right? You could buy European machinery or you could buy Chinese machinery. They have different ways of operating, right? So if the intermediate inputs are better, then productivity will be higher, even though the producer himself or herself is not doing much except taking inputs. So that is one source of externality, where a positive externality is causing productivity. So then there is aggregate capital, which is the Manesar example. There are other other factories there. So aggregate capital is high. So my capital, let's say, is 100 crores, but there are 10 other factories of my kind over there. So there actually, what is the benefit I'm getting of 1,000 crore? That's the aggregate capital benefit that I'm getting. So that is another source. Infrastructure, we know that. So especially in the hinterland, right, connectivity to the coastal areas, to good ports, is necessary for them to trade, for them to get their inputs in and to send their output out. So infrastructure, bridges, right, seaports, airports, all of these, railways, all of it matters. And we know that our government has been in the process of doing it for several years. Then human capital accumulation. That should be something that NISPR understands, right? So all of the collective science that you do. So the way to look at it is, you can do a study on your own, right? But when you come to work, you talk to your fellows, scientists, even without realizing, ideas are shaped, right? So that kind of thing comes through human capital accumulation. The more human capital accumulation there is, the more the benefit, right? So that comes from Lucas. So all these are sources of externalities, and they lead to increasing returns. For a producer, the returns are constant, returns to scale. That's the technology. But because of this additional factor, which is not in my control as a producer, I will have increasing returns. Okay. So what will happen? Return to producer is high, or the return to the economy is higher. In this setting, when we have positive externalities, as a producer, I get some return. Is the return to the economy higher or lower? Higher. So when each producer is deciding how much to operate at, how much to grow, they will operate at a level where their return and their costs, so there is a benefit, right? Will they go to the level where the economy benefits? No. Okay. So in these settings, overall growth will be lower than what it optimally should be. Okay. Now, having seen this, what should the government do if we accept this? If we know that economic growth, because of decentralization, because of individual producers deciding their actions, will operate at a level which is lower than what the society or the economy as a whole should be, what should the government do? Okay, think about that. This is a role why we want to understand what drives growth, right? Because this is now giving us an opportunity, okay, to define policy appropriately, right? Yes. So that's why we need to understand growth, drivers of growth, right? See it in terms of modeling, rigorous modeling, and see it in terms of empirical. What is the data telling us? So then externalities are fine, they exist, but we still need to know why new technologies come, why they perform, why old technologies die, right? So we go back to the process of creative destruction, only now it's not just an exposition, but this is now analytically proven. So Agion and how it built on Schumpeter's creative destruction process, and they now define an R&D sector exclusively. Okay, so there are people who are skilled who will work in the R&D sector, but if they work in the R&D sector, they are not available for production. Right? So think of it this way, you're all scientists here, right? So you are part of R&D, government sponsored R&D, but you could technically be in your functional areas in the industry, right? So for the economy as a whole, you're not contributing to production at this time, you're part of R&D, correct? So that is one. The second part is this choice of R&D, size of R&D is intertemporal. So what it does, innovation gives its innovator some monopoly for some time, right? Because of that monopoly, they get what is monopoly profits, excess profits, right? While they are doing that, they destroy the previous monopoly. Okay? Now, once every business knows that, right, and they see competition in their area, they are naturally going to think, are my competitors going to, in the future, invest more in R&D? Can I compete with that? Should I put my resources into R&D now? Right? So they can choose very rationally to say, I am not going to invest in R&D now because in the future, whatever R&D I do, whatever monopoly profits that I expect to get will be wiped out because my competition will beat me to it. That's it. Well, that is also there. So going back to the software example, right? They didn't cannibalize themselves, but somebody else did, right? So if there is enough foresight, right, they could do that, right? But it is so uncertain, and that's also part of this model. It is so uncertain that we don't know for sure. So why not make sure that you get the profits that you're getting now, right? So it's a judgment call. And therefore, you do have these cases where old technologies, producers, they continue with it till they're forced not to, right? So this has been the process for a good 200 years. And at least for the foreseeable future, it will continue like that. Now, why will it continue like that? What's the single most important thing? Innovator gains. Simple. That's the incentive, right? So if they can put things together, they benefit. But we'll see how just innovation does not help, right? There is an epistemic base of science that is important. So there is a strategic element here, like Charu said, there is cannibalizing that is even ahead of the model. Firms innovate to create value and to replace competitors, right? So now there are two externalities, one positive, the other negative, right? Because when an innovator decides, right, when Anthropic is coming out with its agentic AI, they know they will capture the market. They don't care how many others are destroyed. Okay. But for the economy as a whole, let's say they beat, OpenAI, all of these they capture the market in the US, right? But for the US economy as a whole, the investments that went into other producers is wasted, right? So this is also a negative externality that comes in. But if we have a decentralized system, by that what we mean is that there are private individuals who decide how much to invest, how much not to invest, then this kind of creative destruction will happen. Now we know when we looked at planning systems, they weren't very good either. The outcomes were even lesser than what the capitalist system achieved. So another thing, when you think about people's benefit, what happens to the losers of the game? That's another thing to think about. So this is the first model where we can actually get into a no growth trap. Okay, so if all producers decide that innovation, investment in R&D is not worth it, one period there is no innovation, then the following periods you can't innovate even if you want to, right? So in this one period, think of it as 50 years, right? So for a long time, if you've not innovated, if the economy doesn't have R&D, science and technology based innovation, it won't be able to innovate. Yeah. Yeah. So when I was in college, we learned about IDPL, and then suddenly it just went, and everything was coming from China, right? And then something like COVID happened, and you realize even if you want it, they're not giving it. They can't, right? So if we stop innovating, our capacity to innovate itself can be washed out. Okay, so what should the government do? In these very dry economics models, right, is something that is the bedrock for policy. Okay, so let's go over that. So can we get sustained growth? Maybe, because multiple equilibria are possible. So in economics, we always try to see the dynamics, and then we see a steady state or an equilibrium, and then analyze two different equilibria, right? So here we could go into a high growth phase, but we could also end up in a no growth trap. So that is feasible. So R&D is not linear, right? It is step ups. There could be maybe a step down, not in this model, but there could be. It's a step down in a way that if you do nothing, it's a step down. Then you can't innovate, right? You can't make it non-stochastic, deterministic. That's the nature of the process. You can only increase the realization. And that's where R&D, science and technology come in. So if you look at where new technologies keep coming, it's because, like now, it's in the US or China. Now, what are the two systems? In the US, instead, I'm going to come to Industrial Revolution and trace it. What is the hub where everybody wants to go? Now, Silicon Valley's core is what? All of those are outcomes, output, right? But Silicon Valley itself was supported by Stanford University, right? So the hub started coming because there was a knowledge hub, as open mind, open science. right? So what happened across the world, okay, including Elon Musk from South Africa, Canada, where it did he go? So it attracts all the people. So I read in the papers a few days ago, despite all the H1B hullabaloo, the AI scientists of India are relocating back to Silicon Valley to be close to where the action is. So it is there, but if the case is compelling, they're still getting funding, right? So one kind of flow, despite political institutions of the time, is they're still congregating where there is a knowledge hub and there is now human capital accumulation around that. What is the other flow? All of this stuff, H1B, the global capability centers in India, there's a boost. What talent they could not use in the US, they are using it in India. Right? So this culture of openness has to be there. Now, if Indian government, for instance, said, you threw us out, we're not going to let you in. It happened. Okay. So then it was consumer goods. Coke was thrown out. IBM was thrown out. Right? We didn't do that. They're coming here. They're using Indian talent in India. Right? So the openness is something which has been historically found, and we are seeing it in play if we just keep ourselves open to seeing it. Right? So that is the important thing. The second important thing we'll come to, and that is directly applicable to you all. Okay? So why are some countries better at it? Britain in 18th and 19th century, USA in 20th, and China in 21st. What is China doing? Yes, too much pressure, certainly. So, correct, right? So they ensure there is a flow from their diaspora outside to people inside, right? They ensure once it is inside, they give them freedom to do it, right? So I was told that it's a convolution kind of process, right? Where they throw money at one thing, let everybody do it, and the best one wins. Okay? Where have they succeeded in building a world beating product? Electric vehicles, BYD. Okay? It is better at it than even Tesla is, right? But that is state sponsored. But the baseline, the underlying process is openness in a weird Chinese way, but weird in the sense it is state directed. It is not decentralized. Yes, they've ensured that, right? So I was told by stellar scientists of India, we cannot compete with them. So I, in my optimism, I said, I don't like to hear that. But the process which they said, okay, not just their diaspora, annually, China invites the luminaries of science in each field to China. And they assign two of their students, science students, to each scientist. Okay, so for those 3 or 4 days, they're perpetually in their company. Okay, so imagine if there is a confluence of so many scientists from all over the world going there and the Chinese students learning, right? So that is immense. So they figured out how to do these things and they're doing it, right? So other people can figure out their own ways of doing it. They have their own way and it is succeeding. right? But what is to be noticed that even within the autocratic political institution, they have been able to develop a culture of open science, right? That's been the bedrock. And that gives you the reason why are R&D tech hubs, locations, and countries changing. Okay, do we know of a tech hub in Britain in the 20th century or in the 21st century? We don't. They had it earlier, but not now. So these things keep moving, and as they move, you will see the technology flows also moving. So, important thing from my own experience at CSIR, please codify your work. Okay? Codify it in a way you can publish it, you can share it on social media, YouTube, whatever. But it should be available to others to build on. Then we will get human capital accumulation, and then maybe we will get results. So those were the models. Now this is a history. These are studies of economic history, of economic growth. And this is again a little bit revealing. So if you permit me to go forward and backward, I will first take you to the example and then come back. Steam engine. Okay. So this is part of our textbooks. So we did it in high school science. Okay. James Watt. But how did James Watt do it? Right? The first inspiration actually came to a gentleman called Thomas Savery. Okay. The trigger was that there was flooding in deep coal mines and how to solve that. So he devised the first steam pump. The use of steam as a source of power, he was the first one. Then came, and that is in 1698. Note the dates for this example. Then Thomas Newcomen in 1712, okay, he developed an industrial machine powered by steam, again used for mine drainage, okay. Now, around this time, we had the scientific revolution, actually predating it, and the Enlightenment, which democratized everything in Europe and in Britain. So, why do we care about democracy in science? Scientific knowledge was not restricted to elites, and that's important. Okay, it was available to the public. So the printing press had come in earlier centuries, postal services came in, publications started happening, newsletters started happening, people could get access to this knowledge, right? So that's what I mean by democratizing knowledge. So then what happened? James Watt, okay, it started in 1698, almost 70 years later is when he developed the actual industrial scale steam engine, which was also efficient, right? It was efficient, which means less costly, so that industry could actually use it, right? But how did he get that? He went to University of Glasgow. So he's an Englishman. He went to Scotland. Scotland universities were actually the bedrock, equivalent to today's Stanford at that time. Not English universities, Scottish universities. He met Professor Black who told him about how gases function and a whole host of other things. Based on that, he devised the separate condenser. Okay. Now, when we talk of technology and we talk of these components and how it works, it can be quite boring. Okay. But you can't understand the process of innovation unless you go into it. Right. So, the innovation here was the separate condenser. Now, if you read Mocker's book and his papers, he has multiple such examples in great detail, right? To somebody like me who's done it herself, it was exciting. To my students, it was like, what has ma'am given us? Right? So, but it's instructive. It was the culture of open science that led James Watt to go to University of Glasgow, where he benefited from the professors there, went back, kept in touch with them, and developed the steam engine, after which the world changed. Right? So if you remember that hockey stick graph, right? That arch came in because of him. And several others, but him definitely, right? So that was Industrial Revolution 1, right? Then in the next century, we had Richard Trevithick, who used the steam engine not fixed, but movable. It was portable. So we had locomotives, right? We had railroads, a revolution in transport, right? And that again changed the world, right? So in most places, what happens is that there is a period of change of technology. You have a period of growth and then it peters out, right? That didn't happen in England, in Britain, because they allowed this open science, they allowed private enterprise, and it worked, kept working. And then later, the hubs moved, right? But the Western world is still the leader, right? Again and again, open science, right? So Moker's thesis, his insight, is that connections between science, technology, innovators is what led to growth and what led to sustained growth in Britain, right? So these are the four basic precepts. So one, a culture of science and open science. He calls this contributing to the epistemic base, which he labels as omega. This is propositional knowledge. This is theory. Then useful knowledge, which is techniques of how to do things. So there was this inspiration by Thomas Savery, used steam, but it was not industrial scale, right? The epistemic base grew. James Watt could dabble into that epistemic base, use it to devise that separate condenser, which made the invention usable. By usable, it produces the output at a low cost, right? So when scientists in CSIR and outside develop a technology, it may work, the prototype, but it has to be not only effective, it has to be efficient. It has to be at a lower cost, and it can be done, right? They may not be able to do it all by themselves, but through open science, learning from others, it is possible, right? access to useful knowledge was enabled. We'll see how it was enabled, which made useful knowledge. There's plenty of useful knowledge in the world, but can we use it? Okay, it made it usable, verifiable. So you don't waste. An innovator, a factory owner, doesn't waste resources using technologies. They know that it is, what should I say? You could say certified by experts. So they're not going to waste their time. Yes, validation. That they're not going to waste their time in time and resources by using that, by adopting it, right? So it is verifiable and then it is improvable. So all of these uh, issues bring out points of action, right? Now, if an ecosystem is built where these things are taken care of, then like Great Britain, which did not produce most of the inventions, but they used them to great effect, right? Growth can still come by. France actually was the amongst the leaders, thought of to be amongst the leaders in science, but they couldn't do this, right? Great Britain did this. So one, culture of science, open science, and now as we will see, okay, talking to the engineers, right? Talking to artisans, talking to craftspeople. That is important. But before we go there, a culture of science means what? Accurate measurement, controlled experiments, and insistent on reproducibility. If it is not reproducible, it's no use for industry. Okay? No use for, therefore, economic activity or growth. So it has to be reproducible. Observations and experience has to be placed in the public domain, right? Whether there is a publication or a patent or a certification, some validation is required to build trust, right? The industrialist, the producer will not know. What they will see is that there are several experts who are validating this piece of technology. And therefore, I can take a chance on it. It seems to be useful to me. I can spend resources on it. I can spend time and effort on it. Then Mokur talks about scientific mentality, which we take as a given now. That time it was not a given. Okay, nature was considered temperamental, right? But what came out, Newton, other scientific scholars, that nature is rational. There are laws of nature. And once we understand it and we build on that, we can actually manipulate nature, right? So steam engine is one, dams are another, right? Build big dams so that water irrigation are available year round. We are not dependent, we are not going to be messed up with droughts. The dams will be there. Scientific culture, this is the key after open science. Applied science can be of service of commercial and manufacturing interests. This is where Great Britain differed. Being a shopkeeper, being a trader, a manufacturer was very respectable there, right? And the scientists were okay to talk with them, right? That was important in order to use the science, the technologies in the industrial process. Without that, it's not going to happen. So we had a small interaction earlier, and I was talking about my informal conversations about streptokinase, about how during the phase when it was being implemented, right, there was a requirement for the scientists to do hand-holding. And what did hand-holding mean? It meant even flying out late at night to ensure that in the shop floor the thing works, whatever it was they were doing at that time, right? So that kind of engagement is required to get over that hurdle of implementing technology. So useful knowledge described as propositional, prescriptive. Prescriptive knowledge includes tacit knowledge, which sometimes cannot be codified. Very difficult. So hand holding, personal contact may be necessary. And it started with this Baconian project. So I'm an economist, applied economist. I know the value of measurement. Okay. So you might have my kind of experience where I ask my cook, इसमें कितना नमक डाला? थोड़ा सा. Right? And I'm like, थोड़ा सा क्या होता है? We need to know measurements, right? So it's when they measured and measured and measured, they could then figure out the relationships, right? थोड़ा सा नमक और थोड़ा सा चाट मसाला can give you a variety of combinations. Now, if we want the recipe to be made and to produce the exact same thing every time, we need to measure, right? Down to 1 ml, 1 cc, whatever you have to use. You have to have the tools which measure exactly, right? So that came through this Baconian project. He was chancellor, and he initiated this project because he was in the government. He could do it, right? And as we will see later on, scientists in France, almost decades later, said he's our guru because he enabled this process where things could be measured and relationships could be established. So let me ask you a very simple thing, which was shocking to me when I learned it. When did you realize that washing hands is hygienic? Childhood, we take it as a given. Do you know that a British doctor was losing patients and didn't know why? Because they were going from one operation theater to another, one patient to another, and for the life of him, he couldn't figure out they're doing everything right. Why are they losing patients? Nobody did at that time. Nobody did, right? He then figured out, right? Long process, but he figured this out, wash hands. And his team objected, didn't want to do it, didn't think it was necessary. But it started. Then in all hospitals, you know that they wear those gowns, they have to scrub their hands, right? We followed it, right? Some of us are fussy. We got into this COVID habit. Anything that comes from outside has to be washed, right? So we still had this case. One kid in my extended family got sick, and the doctors just couldn't figure out what went wrong. And he was sick for a while. He was in the ICU, right? Dig. He bought a can of soda, drank straight out of it. Turned out it was contaminated. The top was contaminated because the stores they're stored in have mice. Mice don't care what they're doing, where they're doing, right? So they finally figured out the exact bacteria which they could trace back. The child was treated, was fine, but that's how important it can get. Something that we now take for granted was not obvious to a celebrated surgeon. He figured it out. Now, unless you have measurement and experimentation, you can't do it. So, experimentation comes later. Communications between scholars and artisans with respect to each other. I'm adding that, right? So, one of the things which was very strange for me, honestly, I was asked when I was asked to be in house in CSIR. First, I couldn't understand that, right? Why do I have to be in house in CSIR to do the study? No, insisted. You'll see. Okay, fine. Let me trust you. Then the second question was, are you a PhD? I'm like, excuse me? So I didn't say that, but it was all over my face. Because in a country like US, you're not even supposed to use doctor. In India, we use everywhere, right? There, when you're writing personal emails or even official communications, you will just write your name, right? So I was again taken aback. What is this? So then I was told that in CSIR, if you're not a doctor, you will not be respected. No one will talk to you. Okay? So I'm like, okay, whatever. At that time, I'm not thinking. And then I start talking to scientists. Okay? Some of them very accomplished. Okay? Very accomplished. Then you have the Indian milieu coming in. They are very accomplished. They've done this, that. Now they're talking to this girl who looks very young, right? Why should they listen to her? And believe me, I can quiz. I can be very stern. And I was, and I extracted respect. Without that, the study wouldn't have happened. So if you heard what was being said about me, one of the first things that I did, even as a student, was I did a study at the World Bank. They were struggling to fund civil services reform. Okay? How do you justify to the board that it is an investment? Basically, you're paying money to tell the surplus staff to go. How is that an investment? Right? So I did that study and I had to talk to multiple managers. They're called task managers who led projects. They didn't know what was coming. They didn't want to talk. I made them talk. The task manager who sponsored us wasn't convinced. Again, young girl, right? He actually came with me for one of the interviews. And after that, I told him, I said, if you come again, shut up. Because the person we were interviewing was senior, right? He dominated the task manager for my study. Because he's task manager, I'm having to shut up. Can't do the study. So ultimately, after about 20 minutes into the interview, I said, please, I have to do this. Right? But basically, the point is that open science, open culture, respect, right? Those are important things required. So if you happen to talk to an MSME person who's good at what he or she does, but certainly not as learned as you are, it is still at an equal footing, right? So I have learned a lot through my experiences. Some of them were even nasty, but you keep learning, right? And when I get carried away, I do get carried away. I'm passionate about my work, but be passionate. Scientists are like that. They have to be half mad to do what they do. But in order for it to be beneficial beyond you, right, to your institution, to the society, you need to be able to do this. You need to be able to rehearse, communicate with between scholars, which you guys are, and artisans, right? So one of my professors asked me, right, you have to be able to explain what you do to your grandmother. You have to have the mastery to explain it in those simple terms. And I learned a lot in CSIR because there were people who did it better for my work than I could do it myself. Right? So it's practice. So I hope you do it as well. So these are the ways, right? Society's first one that is listed here is 1662. The process carried on well into the next century. So Royal Society started out, and amongst the things that they were looking at was technology also. But after a few years, they didn't get traction. They stopped funding it, right? But there were others who did. So these are, I don't know how to pronounce it in French, but it's the French Society. Then it's not just societies, like you have probably INSA and special domain societies. Even something like Masonic lodges was hosting lectures, right? So by the name, you know it was started by Masons, right? If you ever read Leonardo da Vinci, you would have heard about it. You would have read about it, right? So even they were hosting discussions with scientists, right? So lectures, coffee house conversations, personal communications, right? Publications, encyclopedias with detailed instructions, detailed diagrams. Even then, there were complaints that how it is written in the encyclopedia, in the catalog, is not how it's performing. So they went back to the scientist, to the scholar, savant, as the book calls them, right? And they responded. So that open science, open communication between scholars, scientists, and their users is what led to Britain taking a lead that lasted for over 2 centuries. It's the only country in the world, barring us in the pre agrarian world. Oh, no, I'm fine. Thank you. So, for most people, this doesn't matter. But for scientists and for industrialists, it really matters because there's cost building at every level. First, being aware of the knowledge. How many people in India know that CSIR is a treasure chest of so many technologies? I'm not sure. Then who has it? Who in CSIR has it, even if they're aware of it? How do we get it? How does the MSME person, I'm taking MSME to put it in focus, then verifying its reliability, certification, validation, testing it in their shop floor, applying it, then empirically testing it either over time or across different units, and then replicating it even further and improving it. there is cost involved at every stage, right? So what as a system it would be good to figure out is at what level should the scientist be involved and at what level the uh, innovator, the MSME producer should take over, right? So that could be different for different sectors. So a very good way to do that is through TRLs. So if we codify TRLs, right, we develop the framework and we are able to assign TRLs to most of the technologies, if not all, and then see over time how is the application going, right? And then come back, use those findings to say that these are the places where funding is required, where support is required. Then it becomes more broad-based. So in the case of Industrial Revolution, costs were lowered because access was enabled. Cost of access were lowered drastically. So one, the program by Bacon, the encyclopedia by Diderot. If somebody knows French here, they'll know how to pronounce it, and similar other cases. So the book is quite detailed. The published paper is less detailed, but it's instructive to see how at every level cost of access was lowered and how important that can be in getting things across. So useful knowledge is usable. There's plenty of useful knowledge created by the R&D system, but for it to become full-fledged innovation, it has to go on the shop floor. It has to become usable. So again, it has to be effective and it has to be efficient. So the book also talks about lower wastage of resources in blind alleys. How many of you are aware of something called phlogiston? Are they chemical background people here? So apparently this theory lasted almost a century. What phlogiston was considered to be an element, a material common to all things that were inflammable. Okay? It was only when oxygen was discovered that oxygen is flammable and that contributes to it was phlogiston ultimately discarded, right? But it took a century for it to happen. So more micro innovations can happen as the conversations go, and they do describe inventions as macro inventions, major breakthroughs like steam engine, and micro inventions, which are incremental improvements. One could argue that steam engine itself was, built on other things, on previous accomplishments, but it was a major breakthrough. So after all those models and all those history lessons, can we get sustained growth? We don't know, but there are several ingredients that come across, which I've already talked about, right? So I'm going to skip this slide and go to the final stage. The only thing here is, again, open science, open communication, right? That's important. Policy implications, why it differs. If it is too low a growth, right, as in the models of externalities, then we should encourage, government should encourage more innovation. Ways to do that is subsidize R&D, stronger patents, right? Whereas if you have a too high growth, right? Social return is negative because of the monopoly profits being destroyed. Then you have to channel R&D, right? Not just subsidize it. So the policy implications differ. And I think they differ not just for an economy, but within an economy across sectors, right? But you have to establish that with empirical data. So if firms are, okay, if there are plenty of firms closer to the technology frontier, as we are seeing in AI right now, let's say US like economy, then it is okay to have the first case, right? Let them go, let them compete. But if we have lower competition where the firms feel that if they invest in R&D, they cannot reap the monopoly profits because their competitors are better and they will come and steal their profits. So they will not invest, right? Then the policy has to be different, right? So very economics is kind of dry. I tried to make it entertaining, but it is very powerful, right? Once we understand it, it is very powerful. So, like doctors, scientists do wonderful, brilliant work, right? But to make their knowledge useful and usable, you do need economics. So, something to think about. So back to fine, we have all this growth, we have increase in GDP. What does it mean for people, right? Think the multidimensional poverty, right? And what does it mean when we cannot readily value it? If it is open AI, if it is electrical vehicles, there is a value to it, you can see it. But what if it is government sponsored? If it is something like streptokinase, we can at least compare it to another medicine which does the same job or is supposed to. What if there are things that you can't value readily? Okay. So that's where the economic impact assessment came in. So what I was told was that it was almost mandated by CSIR. They were strongly encouraged to figure out what is the economic impact of CSIR technologies, right? So that's how the study came about, right? And going into the methodology of it is even more mind numbing and even drier than thinking about growth. But let me show you the results, right? For those who haven't seen it, and for those who've seen it ad nauseum, please, I apologize in advance. Okay, so this graph was the most popular. Okay, this is streptokinase and what it did. Okay, this is Sanofi Aventis. This was the only thing available as a clot buster. If those who are not aware, streptokinase is a clot buster. And in the event of a heart attack caused by a blood clot, if it is administered in the first 3 to 4 hours, it is life-saving, right? So the outcome is binary, and that really helped. The patient either lives or dies, right? So we calculated the average price, inflation adjusted. This is where CSIR's first molecule came. You can see the drop in the price, right? Because this is government sponsored. Now, when we do a simple valuation, right? Royalties are based on this price. Okay? And you will see how much that counts. So the blue chart is basically like a forecast line, right? So that the red is actual, the purple is actual. It brought the price, average price down because of CSIR's first molecule. Okay. Now, if this is what would have been the price if CSIR molecule had not. So remember, there are always confounding factors. Okay. So, like I said, my technology, this is the baseline. This is what my technology does. This is the impact, right? But there are other things happening. So, fine, CSIR's technology came and it created this value, but this was already rising, right? So, I cannot claim that this was because of CSIR technology. So, that's the kind of thing we are trying to show here. So, right? So we can't claim that the entire price fall is because of CSIRs. Yeah. This is the price of the vial, one dose that needs to be administered. So this is nothing to do with how much CSIR spent. This is to the user. If I'm having a heart attack and I buy a streptokinase vial, this is the cost. Yes, the first one. Wait. This is the second molecule. Okay, and you can see it dropped further. Now, price doesn't tell us exactly the impact. Okay, the next graph will. So that is TPA, recombinant TPA. TPA was the pre-existing molecule, which was considered the gold standard. So this is what it did, the utility it created for the economy, right? Which is not captured by monetary growth. You see that? This is 20,000 vials only. And by that time, we are getting into 80,000 vials. Total one is also increasing. Sorry. Okay, so other Indian producers also came in, right? And the overall availability increased a lot, and that mattered. Okay, now this is the easy part. The getting this data, which is a third party data, okay, and it cost a few lakhs at that time. I had to spend a lot of time and effort to convince CSIR to spend money on it. Right? So data is costly, but it was well worth it. Now, this is the value creation. What was the economic impact? Right? This is another one. I'll come back to this later. So, direct value created from 1995 to 2011. That's what this study did. CSIR lab got 1.9 crores. Licensees got 17 crores. Users, 16,000. And we sweated to generate a rigorous number which could not be challenged. And I had a lot of colleagues who were very tolerant of my non-science background questions at that time. So we did this for tractor, we did this for streptokinase, we did this for 4 other technologies, okay? Economic impact, what if not streptokinase, right? Would have been 10,000 crores. And we could do this because there was a binary outcome, person dies or lives. There is a way to value a person's life years, right? Actuarial science does it. The burden of disease study was done. We could use that, right? So several small pieces put together. We also did a survey of doctors, cardiologists in India. Very small survey, but we made sure they were all independent, right? So from 4 or 5 different corners of the country, to say that the clinical trials done for streptokinase world over are equally valid in India. It's not that Indians are different, so they will respond differently, right? That would be a criticism. So we put together at every point, if you read the paper, some of it is there in it, how to piece it together. Therefore, this number became very difficult to challenge. Any study is a study, right? You can always find ways to improve it. I could tell ways to improve it. But it is, at that time, with that budget, this is the best that was done, and it was well received. So that is the important thing, right? So when we think about GDP growth, it is also incumbent in countries like India to think of how people benefit, right? And in that, how many people are served is an important metric, right? Affordability is access, whether it is access to knowledge or access to products and services. At that time, this is from that study, the presentation then, incentives for scientists, technologists, and sustained engagement with industry. So I think I've given you enough food for thought, and I'd like to close my presentation. I'm open to questions, any further that you have. So the chart I skipped over, right? What we did there, it was a very simple intervention, too simple actually, but you see it everywhere now. So Gujarat had a tile industry which would import clay from Ukraine, right? Which had the properties which were very good for the tile. Then there was some problem with importing it. They went to this extension center of CSIR, CGCRI, in Gujarat, and they asked them, can you help us? So using domestic clays, they figured out a mixture which would have the same properties. Fine. They demonstrated it to 16 MSME players over there, right? By the time I had done my study, 66 units were using it. They didn't pay for it. How did they get it? Through openness amongst the 16 people. So it turns out they're very helpful to each other. So somebody is related to somebody. They said, Acha, we got this. Why don't you come and see it? And that's how it happened. It is an industry now. At that time, tiles in the market were coming from China and Italy. If you go to stores now, it is only Gujarat tiles, right? So we couldn't do an economic impact assessment for the users, because then we have to do a survey of the consumers, which is very costly. But what we could get is what it did to the industry, right? So this is one of the things that most economists wouldn't do it, but we did it here. We took how much more output came. So everything that came from those CSIR units, that's extra, right? And what was the price before the intervention? Okay, so the value was upwards of 5,000 crores. So this is not fully rigorous, right? But econometrically, we did it and we found a significant positive effect, and that holds, right? So the gold standard in economic impact exercises is controlled experiments. You would have heard of Professor Abhijit Banerjee, right? He has done extensive work, and along with Professor Esther Duflo, they've done their most famous work is the intervention in Delhi schools, remedial education, right? And so the ASR performance for the Delhi schools started rising, right? Now, those experiments can be done because you can separate. You can have a control group and you can have a treatment group. We can't do that for CSIR, right? So when it is an industry partner, which is non-exclusive, simply out of the question. But for for an exclusive partner, it is out of the question because one or two will get it. For non-exclusive licensing, even there, for those who've applied, I could have a lottery, right? Where I take out, let's say, 50 who will get it and the others who won't. It's not possible to do that, right? So this is a pseudo experimental study. These are all econometric studies. This is the best we can do.
So like you said, like there was a fall in influence from China tiles after introduction of this tile technology from Gujarat.
We will study. I'm just telling you that we won't find that much. But what is the question you're asking?
Question is, suppose we collect this kind of data, if because of introduction of this technology, the product came, and because of this particular product, the import of a particular another similar product is reduced.
Yes.
We can be attributed to import substitution because of technology.
Yes. Streptocan is different. Sanofi when this ultimately went out of the Indian market. So it is possible.
Just I want to you said Britain or the open science needs doing open science. For 200 years or at least 150 years they were in India. So what they did here in for open science, because they are not open any kind of science, they may be open. Yeah.
The railroads were made so that they can have better control of the whole country. Because moving of forces and all that. Actually, so railroads were. It's difficult to, the setup is different.
Yeah. Because we were cultivating cotton here and then instead of processing it here. Yeah.
No, but I think what was important to me, what Manisha talked, we all talk about the R&D ecosystem.
Yeah.
She showed what she called externalities. I'm not an economist, but that is what we try to fix. Why Silicon Valley works, or IIT Chennai. IIT Chennai, that whole structure, Tamil Nadu, or Bangalore. In fact, many people say why the first GE R&D center came in Bangalore. It was because of IISc. IISc was producing engineers, and they would go to GE. So one like Stanford, one called Boston. There's a cluster, that knowledge sharing, what we talked about, the human resources, and what the PSA is doing now, the city clusters, Pune cluster. So this is all ideas to localize the whole talent, capital, infrastructure, what she talked about. No, also we knew it, but it was I did not realize the economic perspective or the way she talked about. For me, that's a revelation. And how policy changes. We all talk of policy institute here, right? But there's a lot of science in what she was talking about. Actually, so the interplay of science, economy, policy, which is what NISPR is supposed to be actually doing, I think that was brought up.
Or call the novel arrays to these universities and get those students stay with them, like you're saying in China.
So in fact, when I called Manisha, I wanted her to talk about the Nobel Prize winners this year because it was on science and innovation. Yeah. The whole model they proposed was how science and technology is driving the innovation. This year's Nobel Prize winners in economics was for them. So that's what I wanted her to mainly focus on the innovation part. Yeah, please.
Nah.
Switch on the mic.
You suggested, or in your talk, you talked about open science, and we are more towards patents. So, and in ancient times or whatever, the graph you saw, the science flourished in India, or the society flourished because of that openness in science, means knowledge, and we are now confounding all the things.
In the book by Mocker, he talks about the Royal Society, which initially barred membership to anyone holding a patent. Okay? So they only wanted members who were interested in science, knowledge, disseminating knowledge, right? But believe me, economics, the way it works, if you don't have incentives, why would anybody put their blood, sweat, hard work into it? It doesn't work. And all you need to think about is socialism. Where are they? So, like I said, capitalism is imperfect, right? There are losers. I didn't get time to bring that question back. What do you do with the losers, right? But socialism doesn't work. So there's this joke that a teacher says, I'll give a reward to whoever comes first. So everybody's trying. And then, so the results are great. Then he says, I'll give this to everybody, divided equally. Nobody's trying. It's just human nature, right? But as a policy, we need a balance, right? Now, I had this argument at home. My husband is an engineer, okay? And so he was saying, why do losers, they get compensated? They benefit too. Do they? Ask it to the 12,000 people who were fired from TCS. Do losers benefit when society benefits? So I was faced to ask this question fairly early when I was doing my PhD, because I was looking at firm restructuring and what happens to people when they're displaced. Okay? Those mechanisms are not there. right? What do we need to take care of? If in the easiest way, harsh way, what would I want if I get fired? I'm going to leave you with that question.
Next job.
If you're not going to see, there are reports now that people are not being fired in their 50s, they're being fired in their 40s and not finding another job. And you know what happens in 40s? You have school going kids and you have parents who are ill. What do you do? Tricky questions.
But still growth is happening. So open science doesn't mean that you don't patent it. That is another version of it. Because she talked about many other things. People, I lose job here, I can go back from Tesla, I go to another company. So there are opportunities. So openness doesn't necessarily mean that you're giving free knowledge. And even like again, I go back to she knows about open source drug discovery model. And CSIR is a non-exclusive model. Why? So we always say non-exclusive because nobody gets monopoly. You need competition. So a non-exclusive license promotes that. If I have technology, she also has become, then the price will be lower. So India has a different model. That's why CSIR prefers non-exclusive. You can have a patent. But in the open source drug discovery model, you apply a patent, but it is available through a Creative Commons license. So that patent can be used by anybody. We are not restricting it. So there are different models of innovation. So it's not that everything has to be, innovation linked. So what she's talking more of knowledge of exchange. It cannot be that they won't go hand in hand. You need to have multiple models.
But one thing I've seen is in the Western countries, though it is open research, it's highly on ethics and integrity.
Oh, of course, that is reproducibility.
Yes, and respect also you see. So these things are interplaying. That's very important. They will not plagiarize or they may be very less cases.
No, that's not true. You look at the Western academic research, I can tell you. If you look at the cancer research, Brazu asked, so much of literature is junk, not reproducible. There's a huge controversy. People publish papers, but the reproducibility.
Yeah, I remember during COVID time when they
the papers, not only that, in cancer, they cannot be reproduced. So you need to do clinical trials where they fail. It's a very complex area. Yeah, you were saying.
Yeah, you are rightly saying. Free and open access is two different things. In software also,
Yes.
free and open access.
Yes.
So something which is free may not be open access and open science, whereas open science or open access may not be always free. Because you may have to create.
He just came from the Global Diamond Access Summit. So where we heard all this. I'm just joking.
We are using open science and open access for last 2 decades. Global science was just right now.
Any students want to ask anything? Yeah. Anybody? Yeah, please.
Suppose we are on the contract study. Said that methodology is important. So think suppose we are also on the economic study. You are writing some indicators. So how to weight those indicators?
How to
weight those weights?
That would be a different talk.
Yeah, it will be a different talk.
He's trying to figure out his problems.
Yeah. That's
good.
good.
Scoop the study.
Yeah. Yeah. So the reason we use a monetary measure is that it's the weight is by default, right? Now you can change those weights, but if you change the weights and you get the results, you have to change a lot. You have to do scenarios because is it the weights or is it your study? You have to defend why you want to give the weights you want to give, right? That has to be rigorous. And you have to ensure that the study is not getting the results it is getting because of those weights. So that needs caution.
Making a model to fit what you want. Yes. That is the question. Yeah. Almost working. I think. No more questions. We must thank our speaker, Dr. Singh, for that insightful and thought-provoking lecture.
Ma'am, your comprehensive perspective on innovation-led growth policy frameworks and economic transformations has provided us with rich intellectual knowledge and insights to reflect upon. Thank you so much. As a token of our deep appreciation and respect, we would like to felicitate our guest with shawl and memento. Thank you, ma'am. On behalf of CSIR-NISpR, I extend our heartfelt thanks to Dr. Manisha G. Singh for delivering such an engaging and enriching lecture. We are grateful for the clarity, depth, and the relevance of the insights you have shared with us. I would also like to thank our directors, senior scientists, faculty members, research scholars, project fellows, and all the participants, including our international participants, for your valuable presence. Such intellectual engagements strengthen our institutional commitment to advancing science communication and policy research. With this, we conclude today's lecture on CSIR-NISpR Distinguished Lecture Series. Thank you all and have a wonderful evening.